All right, welcome to the live stream. This is obviously a few acres of snow, first time doing this, and today we're going to be talking a little bit about Canadian politics, history, and the Constitution with Danny Philp. Philp?
Philp, first try.
Philp, there we go. Perfect. Um, Danny is a top contributor at Quora, and he's the past branch chairman of the Monarchist League of Canada. So you know where his loyalties lie as far as our new king is concerned. He served on numerous civic committees, worked on numerous political campaigns, and he describes himself on Quora as an all-round political junkie. If you'd like to get in contact with Danny, there's his information in the description on Twitter and on Quora. Right, Danny?
It's true. I have an illness. I
You have
can't
an
seem to look
illness.
away.
Well, these days that seems to be more and more the case, right? With things that are going on, and so I guess maybe that's a good place to start. Maybe we can start with some of the things that have been going on in the news. We mentioned just before the live stream started that there was something, you know, awry, perhaps, depending on your point of view, going on in Alberta with the Sovereignty Act. Do you want to maybe talk to us a little bit about that? What's happened, and maybe your thoughts on it, whether it's works within the Constitution, whether it's legit or not?
Sure. It basically what the UPC are trying to do is create a law that allows them to order anything controlled by the provinces to ignore federal laws if they don't like it.
Right,
And the problem with that is that they're directly going into things that are clearly constitutionally within the sphere of the federal government. So
right,
the feds pass a law that happens across Canada. Alberta doesn't happen to like it. They can direct anything in the province to ignore it. Now they can't direct citizens to ignore it. They can't they
right.
can't necessarily direct the corner store to ignore it. Um, and the way they're justifying it
And
is to
so
say
the importance of that, though, is that it could bring up a conflict between the province, provincial legislation, and the Fed. So,
exactly,
which
yeah.
laws do you follow, right?
Yeah, and like they're justifying it by using BC as the example with marijuana laws, where
Right,
it was illegal across Canada by federal statute, but BC just didn't bother to enforce it. So that's sort of the line of reasoning they're using. But I mean, I think there's a far cry between having the police not necessarily banging down doors over a joint and flat out
right,
ignoring federal statutes because you don't like them.
right,
So that's the real issue. So at that point, it starts to look like a bit of a constitutional crisis,
right.
because what prevails? What do you do?
What do you do?
You're
What do you do in that situation? Say somebody decides to break a federal law,
Mhm.
and that someone who works for a provincial organization.
Yep.
What do you do? What happens in that
Well,
situation?
that becomes the question, right? Because the thing with criminal law in Canada is that it's federal. It's
Right,
across the country. You break a federal law in PEI, it's the same as breaking a
right,
law in BC. There's no difference. So if there is conceivably an opportunity for a crown prosecutor to start prosecuting folks that are just trying to obey the provincial law,
right,
without perhaps realizing that they're breaking the federal statute, right?
right,
So what to do about it? What's interesting is Trudeau is now talking that nothing is off the table. And what that says to me is that he's probably looking at a little known power known as disallowance, and it essentially allows the governor general to disallow or veto, for lack of a better term, a provincial law.
right.
Now, there's some qualifications there. It has to be done within a certain period of time, and but at the end of the day, the
Right, yeah,
governor.
but that was part of the issue too, right? Wasn't it that it's 30 days or something? I was reading.
No, it's longer than 30 days. Can't remember
Well,
off the top of my head, to be
I
honest with you.
think in the Sovereignty Act they decided that it would be 30 days, but usually it's something like 6 months.
Well, that's the difference, though, right? Is the Quebec, or excuse me, Alberta can pass anything at once. It doesn't trump
Right,
the Constitution, and the Constitution, the power of disallowance is clearly spelled out in the Constitution Act
right, right.
1867. So I want to say it was 6 months. But the point there is it allows the governor general to revoke royal assent that was given by a
Hmm.
lieutenant governor.
Right,
So it just nullifies that law. But that,
right,
as you might imagine, is going to upset the Alberta premier, and has the real potential to upset a lot of other premiers. I mean, there's a reason this power hasn't been used in decades.
Hmm.
that
Hmm.
allows the feds to trample what is clearly provincial territory. But we're in a unique position because now we've got a province clearly willing to trample over federal territory.
Right.
So if there is a constitutional crisis, it's not actually it's interesting because it's not going to be the feds that are going to invoke it. It's going to be the feds getting backed into a corner where they don't have much of an option because if Trudeau
Right.
doesn't if this goes through, Trudeau is not going to have any option but to do something or. The
Right.
provinces are going to turn Ottawa into a little more than a trade central union where the military lives.
Right.
So,
Well, maybe it's worth even talking about that idea. I like because I'm interested in it at least of a constitutional crisis, like in terms of the
mhm.
consequences that it can have. I guess they're always particular to the circumstances that they're in. The King Bing affair, the
Probably the biggest one, yeah.
um, yeah, the biggest one probably. But what do you see? Like I don't know. Let's talk options. Like what could come of this?
Yep. So things are a little more settled these days, thanks to the courts and specifically the Constitution Act 1984, excuse me, 82,
82, yeah.
which gave the courts a lot more power to
Hmm.
interpret the Constitution. So
Right.
all things being equal, this passes. The MLAs pass it out in Alberta. The lieutenant governor signs it. It's immediately going to be challenged. They can try to bring Section 33 in for the notwithstanding clause. The
Right.
problem is that the notwithstanding clause cannot override certain fundamental rights in the charter.
Right.
Uh,
Oh, it can't.
and
Yeah. So let's like talk about
the,
that. So it can't. So what kind of things can it
so
override then?
there are two types of rights in Canada. There's fundamental rights and there's legal rights.
Right.
And somewhat counterintuitively, the legal rights are the more important ones.
Hmm.
So
Hmm.
you can't use the notwithstanding clause to keep people from voting, for example.
Right.
Voting is a legal right.
Right.
Whereas you can use the notwithstanding clause like Quebec did to restrict the use of religious symbols in some
Which is a
locations,
fundamental right.
which is a
Right.
fundamental right. So the right of religion, freedom of religion, freedom of expression, that sort of stuff is a fundamental right as opposed to a legal right.
Right. Okay. Oh, hey
Um,
there, Rob. Welcome to the live stream. But okay. So, anyways, yeah. So,
Yep. So, like
um,
I say, all things being equal, if all of that were to pass, the courts are going to jump on this in a heartbeat. The UPC is going to lose them all. It's going to wind up in the Supreme Court, and at that point, Alberta needs to make a decision. Once the
right.
Supreme Court says, because every other court is going to put the law aside, and then it'll go to appeal, and then appeal and appeal. And at that point, Alberta has to make a decision.
Right.
How far down this rabbit hole are you willing to go?
Right.
And I just have a very difficult time, seeing the military marching in to take control. You know what I mean?
Well,
Um,
and I guess that's the question: is that the worst case scenario? Like, is that what we're talking about? You know?
Probably the worst case scenario, to my view. I just don't see it going down that road because we're not talking about
Yeah.
an insurrection here. We're not talking about a revolution. We're
Right.
talking about a provincial government that has up and decided to start trampling in areas it has no constitutional authority to do so.
Right.
The final straw that I can realistically see happening, and honestly, this is a stretch, would be for either the lieutenant governor to dismiss the government. Because remember, the governor general, lieutenant governors, they can't just fire the prime minister or the premier. They
Right.
have to dismiss the government, dismissing the government and going for a new election and seeing what happens after that.
Right.
But
Right.
that is like that would be bigger than the Bing King affair, for something
Right.
like that to
Yeah.
happen.
Yeah. Yeah.
But it would be the final straw. And even at that, if they had a lieutenant governor that was sympathetic to the government, at that point, the governor, because lieutenant governors, they serve at His Majesty's pleasure through the governor
Hmm.
general, and
Right.
she could certainly dismiss the lieutenant governor and install one that will just drop the writ.
Right. I guess it just sort of more than anything, then like these are serious things to have happen, and it, a country falling apart probably is death by a thousand cuts, and maybe
Yeah.
this is a cut. You never know, but either way, it just seems like it's a sign of the times in some ways,
Mhm.
like that. There's a lot of this anti-Trudeau sentiment. I would argue is a part of this, right? Like
Mhm.
I don't know if you agree or not, but it seems that we're at this sort of stage, a late Liberal government where confidence is at its lowest, and I don't know. What do you think about that? Do you think that we can blame Trudeau for it? Is that the right word, or
we're still talking about the Alberta thing here.
Yeah, 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 yeah.
So I don't know that we can blame Trudeau for it because at the end of the day, we're a federation at the end of the day, right? So I
Right,
mean, the provinces they've got their spheres of influences that are constitutionally entrenched to them. The
right,
With a premier that's now decided to stand up and make these decisions and go down this road, whatever her reasonings are to do it, I don't see how you can point it at the prime minister and say this is your fault.
right.
Um,
No, yeah, no, and I guess I'm not saying that necessarily. I realize I'm jumping a couple points ahead. I just from my perspective, sometimes it does seem that he generates a lot of antipathy
oh,
among people. And is that his fault? Like, I probably not, but
Yeah, no, I mean Trudeau. I've made the joke with you in the past. Is if Trudeau were to walk on water, his haters would say he couldn't swim.
right,
There's just no pleasing some people, and Trudeau is the
yeah,
antithesis of what some of these folks don't like. He's
right,
he's young, he's energetic, he's photogenic.
yeah,
He managed to capture an awful lot of people's hearts and minds for a long time there, and he's
right.
the epitome of liberalism. He that definitely generates an awful lot of I don't like this from folks along those
Yeah,
lines,
yeah,
right? So,
yeah.
uh,
And I guess you could argue that Harper back in the day was, there's all the Stop Harper
mhm,
girl, in the House of Commons there.
yep.
Like, I guess he generated when you don't like a politician, they tend to
Y-
or their politics in some
Yeah, I
sense.
would say that Harper was boring enough that he just can't generate the same kind of hate that Trudeau does.
Yeah, yeah, yeah,
And I mean, you and I have had a brief conversations around that too. I mean, for whatever my issues with Harper are, the man was a masterful politician.
yeah, 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 for sure. Yeah,
And part of that mastery, I think, was the fact that he was a little on the boring side.
right, right.
He wasn't the type to engender anything like the Freedom Convoy.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. Lego hair and
All
all
that.
that. Yeah. So I got a question in the chat here. If you're interested, I'm not sure I entirely understand, but Rob Candle asks, "Can you explain collective rights in a way even an American can understand?" I'm not sure what you mean there by collective rights, Rob. If you could expand, I'd love to take the
My
opportunity to answer you.
Yeah, my guess is collective rights in a constitutional sense. My
Right,
guess is that in the U.S. that tends to refer to the actual amendments, the Bill of Rights. I
right, right.
suspect he's probably asking about the same thing in Canada, and if that is the case, it's pretty straightforward. It's the Charter of. I mean, we've got common law rights, of course, and then we've got rights that are enumerated in the Constitution Act of 1982 in the Charter, and they're pretty similar to the
Hmm.
U.S. Obviously, we don't have a Second Amendment or any equivalent to the Second Amendment,
Indeed. Yeah,
um,
yeah.
and a lot of it boils down to sort of the way the difference in the rights were written was the U.S. was founded on a philosophy of oh geez, what's the phrase they use? Pursuit of
Life,
Yeah,
liberty,
life,
and the
liberty,
pursuit
pursuit
of
of happiness.
happiness.
Whereas Canada was
Yeah.
founded on the principle of peace,
Peace,
order, and
order,
good
and good
government.
government.
Yeah,
Yeah, yeah.
and the difference.
I love that
Yeah,
phrase. Yeah,
and
that's
the
great.
difference in rights really reflects that, right? So again, the Second Amendment might be kind of
Right,
the best example of that.
right. Okay. So, I mean, I think maybe even Rob could be referencing. Maybe he's watched that JJ McCullough video. I know we talked about not getting into JJ today necessarily, but where he refers to different groups in Canada having some kind of collective rights. Is that also? Yeah, there you go. So JJ McCullough described them as the rights of groups. So I don't know if you've seen that video, but he says that Quebecers have specific rights as a group because they speak French, and the French language is preserved in Canada.
Mhm.
Indigenous people in Canada have certain rights as a group because their status is
Mhm.
protected. People who intersect between these have a special
Mhm.
status. Not necessarily those two. I'm trying to treat JJ as openly as possible here. I'm not sure I agree with his ideas, but I don't know. Have you seen that video at all?
I haven't,
Do you
but
know?
if JJ said it, odds are I disagree with it. Um, yeah, but I mean, he's not wrong in as much as, yeah, there's certainly some historical context there. But what needs to be remembered is Canada wasn't founded by just two nations, right? It was founded by three. So the English,
Right.
the French, and the First Nations. The First Nations tends to get forgotten there an awful lot. But
Right.
to make the argument that it's not right or it's unfair that Quebec is protected in Canada constitutionally, I mean, hell,
Right.
the Catholic school boards are constitutionally protected in Canada, and that drives me
Yep.
bonkers.
Yep.
But
Yep.
there are much bigger fish to fry here. And if I'm
Yep.
looking to change Canada in some regard, I'm not starting with English and French. But
Right.
if we're going to be honest about it, I mean, Quebec has a lot of distinctions, and it returns 78 seats,
Right.
338 in
Yeah. And
Chamber,
so,
and 78 of them are in Quebec.
yeah.
Sometimes,
And so for you, it's always that
yep,
pragmatic element. They just have that political power,
yeah.
that
Sometimes
weight,
life
right?
just isn't fair. Um,
Right.
and JJ can speak to as much of a utopia as he thinks the American political system is. But let's just be realistic about it. 78 seats is too
Right.
much power to mess with.
Right. Right. Yeah. On a moral, ethical level too, I think you're more you're in favor of protecting French as well. I think you said at one
Yeah, I
point.
mean, anywhere as much as 16 to 24% of the population speaks French, and there's just, and let's be honest with it. Before the Quiet Revolution, I mean, it's no wonder Quebec is as protective as they are when you think about how they were treated
Right.
before the Quiet Revolution.
Yeah. Yeah.
When I lived in Montreal, I worked with some folks whose parents went through it. During the Royal Commission on Languages, the famous phrase
Hmm.
was the bosses, they speak English.
Right.
And so, it's no wonder that there's a lot of pent up animosity there. But uh, there does need to be a certain amount of reality added to that situation as well. I mean,
Hmm.
the langue d'affaires is English.
Right.
So get on board. Like when I worked in Montreal, I came from Ontario, and I actually had to get a special provision from the OQLF to have an English keyboard.
Right.
And we qualified that because most of my business was done in English Canada. So there's a
Right.
there's a level here, right? And I'm not sure that
Right.
Quebec's found it yet, but it's their demand to protect French is understandable.
Right. Welcome, May. Absolutely pitiful to the stream. Actually, there's a couple people here showing up. Maybe we should say hi. Michael Knox made a comment here, and this is relevant to our discussion. I think could we protect First Nations as much as we discuss French? I guess
Yep.
the idea that we have a lot of conversations about French, and
Hmm.
I mean, I would argue that we do talk more about these today, but we can always
Yep.
do more. I don't know. What do you think
Yep. So
there,
full
Danny?
disclosure, I know Knox.
Oh yeah.
Yep. Knox actually is from New Zealand, and he's particularly interested in First Nation issues,
Okay. Yeah. Yeah.
as his kids are Maui, Mari.
I think it's pronounced Mori or something like that. Mori, or
Yeah,
I don't know.
there,
My brother-in-law is Kiwi as well, actually.
right. So this is obviously a topic that's pretty near and dear to Knox's heart,
Right.
and I would actually agree with Knox. He and I have had this conversation in the past. The First Nations, they took an awful lot of nonsense for an awful long time, and there's a bit of a reckoning going on right now that's long overdue.
Hmm.
That the it becomes tricky because I'm not in favor of opening up the Constitution for damn near anything.
Hmm.
But they're definitely we definitely all too easily forget that there's a third founding partner.
Right.
The First Nations were never conquered; they were never, and they need to be treated as such. The real question becomes, how do we do that? When you take a look at a lot of the land claims going on, and for
Hmm.
clarity, I don't have an answer to this, but you take a
Right.
look at the land claims going on, and you make an agreement with the Mohawks. And then out of the woodwork comes the Hennessy Nation or the Men's Fire Council or this or that, says this group couldn't speak
Right.
for, and it's that I think is the real stumbling block. And I
Hmm.
don't have an answer for it. What I do know is that depending how you define First Nation or Aboriginal in this country, they make up between 4 and 12% of this country.
Right.
If they got together as a voting bloc, I mean, they could wield some tremendous power.
Right. But that is part of the issue, given the fact that they are spread across many provinces, and
Oh, yeah.
that they aren't historically right a
Nope.
voting block, and
Nope. No,
the
they're all
Assembly of
separate
First
nations.
Nations. I don't think a lot of well, some nations probably do recognize the assembly to one degree or another as well. So,
Yeah, the AFN is like having grown up in Brantford.
right.
I actually lived in the south side of the city, and which is just heading straight into Six Nations.
Hmm.
And so we paid a lot of attention to this stuff when growing up. And the AFN, I think, is uh, I think it's an organization with created with the best intentions.
Right.
I just think it's become a beast unto itself.
Hmm.
So they need to. Well, I shouldn't sit here and tell them what to say what they need to do, right? What I can say is they're clearly not recognized very universally within the Aboriginal community to be able to speak for everyone, and why should they?
Right. Yeah. 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 Indeed. Michael says again they should be a block. Yeah, I think it's like you say. It's just it's hard to make that happen. I think it's
Yep. No,
they're subject to colonialism for all this time. The idea was to divide and conquer. Like yeah,
yep. No, but if they could become a bloc, like I say, they would be a powerful force in this country.
right. Right,
So
and there goes to your sort of political pragmatism there again. I guess Quebec has all the seats.
yeah,
That's why French
yep.
is it's a
Well, again,
bilingual
with first
country.
past the post, you got. I mentioned first past the post mostly because I know how much Knox hates this system, and I largely agree with him. With first past the post, if you had a 12% of the country voting as a bloc, because you can lead this country with as little as 29% of the vote if the conditions are right.
Right,
And if you had 12% all voting one way, yeah, that power would be enormous.
right, right, right. Yeah. But I guess building those coalitions is, that's the work of politicians, isn't it? And
Yeah,
maybe,
but more in this case, it's within their own nations, right?
yeah, yeah.
So
MMP or die, LOL. What
yeah,
is MMP?
mixed member
Oh, mixed
proportional.
member
Yeah,
proportional
yeah.
representation. Yeah,
I,
yeah, yeah, yeah. There
I'm
you
an
go.
SPV guy.
There you
Knox
go.
is an MMP. So yeah,
There you go. There's
yeah.
the conflict. So, well, let's talk about that actually. So, you have some pretty strong views on. Well, this leads out of Trudeau in a way, right? We both, I think, we talked about this yesterday. We Our greatest disappointment from probably this prime minister is his well maybe my biggest disappointment, at least I'll speak for myself, was the failure to bring about change, electoral reform.
Yeah.
So you have strong views on this.
Yep. So I I get why Trudeau did what he did. There was no way for him to win this without a consensus.
Right.
If he had gone STV,
So
I
a
think is where he would
consensus
have won
from the other
all
parties,
parties.
right?
Yeah,
Because and I didn't know this what you were talking about earlier, but so he did a commission that was you know
all party. Yeah.
involved all the parties, right?
Yep.
So
Yep. Yeah,
and
and
each party had a different
yep, yeah. Trudeau, I think, was leaning towards STV. The Tories, if I remember correctly, they were basically status quo. The NDP, I don't quite remember what they wanted, but just there was no consensus to be found. Nobody would give on anything. And
right,
it makes sense the Tories wouldn't do it because they would, if it was anything other than first past the post, they'd probably never form another government.
right,
And for Trudeau to walk out of there and say, "Well, screw y'all, we're going with STV." Well, now he's just committed to gaming the system, so the Liberals are in power for the foreseeable future.
right.
Like there was no way to win based
So,
on the
but
conditions that were
could you
there.
clarify that? So, why do you think he couldn't have just, that was he had a mandate, right? He
Mhm.
said he was going to do that. He got elected
Yep.
on like a huge sweep across the country. A lot of
Yep.
people expected this. Why couldn't he just um, bring it about, right?
Well, it was absolutely within his power to do, no doubt about it. But like I
Yeah,
say, if he'd simply put his foot down and said, "I don't care what the commission can't find a consensus, therefore we're going with what I like." Well,
yeah,
obviously, what I like is what's going to keep my party in power. And having to go back face the electoral after that is that's a tough sell.
yeah.
So
But I guess it just to me and to everybody that spoke to about the time, it's what Michael here is saying. The prince, no one will vote out the vehicle that got them power. The idea that it gave off the sense for a lot of people who voted him in that he's not going to change a system that
yeah,
got
see,
him
and
into
I
power,
just don't
right?
agree because there are definitely other systems. SDV would if SDV came about through a consensus, the Liberals would probably be in power for the foreseeable future, or at the very least, have extraordinarily strong minorities. Just because the Liberals in
Right.
Canada is everyone's second choice. It's either your first choice or your second choice. Tories don't.
Yeah.
Well, it's a little different now with the PPC, I suppose.
Right.
But even most diehard Tories I know would never vote PPC. So
Right.
If you're a Tory, you tend to vote Liberal as your second choice. If you're an NDPer, you'd never vote Tory. You tend to vote Liberal as your
Right.
second choice. So,
Well,
um,
maybe it just speaks to the terrible messaging machine of the liberals, but the messaging at the time was not that, oh, we couldn't get a consensus. It was, well, if we do this, then we're going to have extremists in parliament and can't have
that
that, right?
so I don't fully agree with you there. That was definitely a message that was sent,
Okay.
and that's a risk you run. If you're
Yeah, and I
all,
mean, I don't care, right? Like, I think that's fine, you
Yep.
know, but
Yeah, and all credit to Knox because he actually brought me around on this line of thinking. Because I generally supported first past the post because it generally brought in governments I approved of.
yeah,
Knox being from New Zealand, where they do use STV, that got me down the road reading more and more about it. And then from there, I was like, okay, we got a point. And at the end of the day, I think Knox once told me that he felt first past the post was akin to a criminal act
right,
because it just does not allow for proper representation.
right. Oh,
Sorry,
here,
yeah,
sorry.
MMP. I
Somebody's a little
apologize.
confused
Yeah,
here.
yeah.
Yeah, so
But
mixed member proportional representation is MMP, STV single transferable vote, FTP first past the post. So
yep, yep, yep.
I don't know if we want to go into the detail.
Not
I
so
don't
much. Yeah.
particularly want to go into the details right now.
Suffice it to
But
say, first past the post is just frickin' horrible for representation, and it's also the
yeah,
reason we can become prime minister in this country with as little as 29% of the vote.
right.
So,
Yeah. No, it's. I get why it happened. There's a certain, well, he won. He got all the votes, and I think
yep.
in a time with less, division than we have now. I don't know if you think we're
Well,
we're divided. It's that the hot take on all the podcasts these days is how divided the West is. Um, but yeah, it does seem like we should be moving in the
yeah,
direction of recognizing the complexity of our society a little better. But
yeah, and to go back to your statement there about getting nut jobs in Parliament,
right,
like in the
yeah,
last election, the PPC they won 1.3% of the vote, which probably would have got them a member or two.
yeah,
And that drives me batty, but such is
yeah.
the way of representation.
Yeah. I mean, I don't know if you listened to some of the accounts of the Emergencies Act inquiry, but they may not be crazy, but they sound pretty incompetent some of the time. The seeing how the sausage is made with these texts that have been going out
Yeah,
between various members of cabinet and everything. It's been pretty shocking.
yeah. Well, it's something I often say is politicians are going to politician. You can't. Uh, Everybody likes to give very lofty ideals about how a country should be run and how politicians should react and what they should do and da 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 da. And I mean, I feel the same way in a lot of regards, but I'm also pragmatic enough to understand that even within the ruling party there are different wings, there are different factions.
Right.
Nothing gets done easily.
Right.
So sometimes decisions get made that are just stupid. But when you start digging into it, you see why that compromise had to be made in order to get something else done. So yeah, how the sausage gets made is never pretty.
Yeah. Yeah. So actually, maybe we should. Oh, although maybe we can. Absolutely pitiful. You're way too soft on Trudeau. He blatantly lied. He promised to keep to reform, but kept all the power to himself when he surprisingly got a majority. And I
And
have to say, Danny, like I get where you're coming from, but
yep,
it does. I don't
I,
know.
I, I can't
There's
argue.
yeah,
He did lie. He flat out said that that election will be the last one we ever did underneath first past the post, and it wasn't.
yeah, yeah,
All I'm saying is I understand the decision Trudeau made
right,
to not move forward, but yeah, I can't defend the fact that he lied.
right. All right.
By the way,
Well,
that there is also a political tactic. It's known as taking the wind out of the sails. Just
what you just did to me?
no, no. My answer to that question is, you're right.
um,
You're right. People tend to
yeah,
go, oh,
yeah. Yeah, exactly. So maybe do you want to talk about? Maybe we should move on to. I mean, Justin Trudeau. I think we could talk for hours. I think you are overall you're fairly sympathetic to the guy in
uh,
certain things, but
yeah. Like again, like I generally support the Liberals, but I'm not the biggest Trudeau fan by any stretch.
right.
I definitely think he's in his twilight. I think it's time for him to go.
Yeah.
I appreciate some of the things he's done. The death with dignity laws, for an example, to me was the centerpiece of anything he's passed.
Right.
On
Although
the other,
now it's turning out to be quite complex.
well, of
I
course it
don't.
is. Yeah.
You
but
know?
the fact that it's an option now is
Yeah,
I fully support that. I strongly
yeah,
support that. Like I say, for me,
yeah.
that's the crown jewel of what he's done, other than get rid of Harper. On the other hand,
I mean, that's the only thing that ever any politician in Canada ever does of any
yeah,
good
yeah,
is get out the last guy. You know,
yeah. On
get
the
the
other
last
hand,
guy.
I'm livid with him about his gun control laws. So
Yeah, yeah. The so what is it that they just added was
can't own,
semi-automatic
transfer, or
rifles.
purchase. Well, yeah, there was that whole 1,500 variants of various military weapons, but the last
Hmm.
one was that you can't own, purchase, or trade handguns anymore. And
But I thought they just added something to that piece of legislation. I can't remember. It's very unclear to me now. I don't know if anybody in the chat knows what I'm talking about. That they added something about semi-automatic rifles to that.
off the top of my head, I'm not sure.
A
What I
ban,
will
but
say about it,
anyways,
as the caveat, is that I am in the vast minority on this topic. I fully recognize that, but
right.
I we should maybe save this for a different topic. But yeah, I could go down the rabbit hole on
Yeah,
this.
I would like to. I'd love to talk about the whole gun control thing. Is I think we both have sort of more complex
Yep.
views on it, but maybe let's do some more Constitution stuff. So, if there's nothing in the chat in terms of questions, maybe we'll go on to the Queen of Canada and the Queen of England. If you're interested in that little discussion, so I had some conversations with people in my comments a lot. People saying, you know, the Queen of England does this. The Queen of England rules Canada, and so we aren't actually independent from Great
So,
Britain in some fundamental way. I
yep.
know that
So,
this statement is offensive to you on a deep level. So
well,
why is that?
first things first. There's no such thing as a king of England, and there hasn't been in 300 years.
Indeed,
That's a misnomer that a lot of people have. The last Queen of England was Queen Anne in
right.
1707. So let's just get that out of the way.
Yeah.
Um,
So no Queen of England. There is no Queen of England, which I
yeah,
think
no,
that was an interesting thing that you told me. So,
yeah,
what
calling.
what is there instead of a king, Queen of England? What or
Well,
King
it'd
of
be
England?
the king of Great Britain, and the United Kingdom of Great Britain and Northern Ireland,
Right,
right? But referring to Charles as the King of England is like referring to Biden as the president of New York.
right,
It just doesn't make sense, right?
right. Well, it's technically true.
Yeah, like if you stretch the word technically, yeah.
Yeah,
But yeah, no, it's it's one of those things. Like when I've looked at some polling questions asked about keeping the monarchy in Canada, it's almost invariably asked with the question of, should we keep the British monarch as head of state? And that
yeah,
question right there becomes invalid because the British
right,
monarch hasn't been head of state in Canada since 1931.
right.
It's They're two legally distinct offices. The
Hmm.
way I usually equate it is somebody I'm just going to pick on Elon Musk because he's so in the news right now. But Elon is the CEO of Twitter, but he's
Right,
also the CEO of Tesla. Nobody confuses those two offices as being the
right,
same, in spite of the fact that they're held by the same person.
right,
So the board of Twitter has no business advising Elon on Tesla matters or vice
right.
versa. So
Yeah,
that's really the heart of the difference. Is that the king of Canada and the king of the United Kingdom are two legally distinct offices. They just
right.
happen to be held by the same person.
But of
The
course, I mean, the argument can be made that a decision that Elon Musk makes for Tesla and one he makes for Twitter, they could be related to each other. Maybe that's stretching the
Well,
comparison
that's
because the
particularly
Queen
stretching
doesn't
this example.
make any decisions right at all in either of
Exactly,
those
yeah.
places. So
Elon Musk making a decision based on his advice from the board of Tesla, if that affects Twitter, that's incidental.
right. Well, anyways, I don't think we should go too far in the comparison because, as we know, I think we were talking about this the other day. The biggest source of ad revenue now for Twitter is
Is Tesla?
SpaceX, I think.
Yeah, SpaceX. Yeah,
So,
yeah, yeah.
so but anyways, regardless, that has nothing to do with this because obviously the Queen has no impact on the decisions
The
made by
king.
her. Sorry, I don't know why I keep on doing it. I know so well that it's the King, but
Maybe
yeah,
it's
and that
because
was
you've
actually a
lived your entire
comment.
life underneath a queen.
Yeah, there you go. Indeed. And that was Rob's comment there too. Don't you have a king now? Yeah, we do have a king, Rob. Um, but anyway, sorry, let's continue with this. So the queen or the king, does the distinction matter? So you think that, yeah, they're two legally separate things. They just
Yeah,
happen to be the same person.
yeah.
And
Because again, I don't know how many times I've had to fight off the notion that Canada was somehow a vassal state of the United Kingdom because the queen is because the queen of England is Canada's queen
right,
at that time. So it's clearly an important distinction, just to make it understood that no, Canada is a
We're a vassal state of the United States, not Great Britain.
there you go. Yeah, yeah. So we've been going down another rabbit hole. I mean, people tend to think we've been independent since 1867, and I mean that's not really true.
No, indeed.
Some people think we've been independent since 1926 with the Bellflower Declaration. Some folks think 1931 with the Statute of Westminster.
Yeah.
And then there's the real answer, which is 1982.
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
it's a bit of a sore spot for me when somebody refers to the King of England as Canada's head of state, because it's somehow suggesting that we're subordinate to the UK.
Right. Right. I mean, to my mind, it is 31 because there's the famous example with World War II where we declared war a couple days later in order to once your foreign affairs is controlled, I feel like that is sort of the marker of your becoming independent. But
yeah, see, and I would counter that with, if you don't have the ability to change your fundamental documents on your own, you can't be independent, no matter how much.
Right. True. Yep. No, you're right. But again, I think it's on a level of de facto. Like, was Britain ever going to say no to us?
No. It was definitely de facto versus de jure in that case. But when you're speaking about this stuff, I feel like you have to be fairly precise. And the truth of the matter is, there were still things we could not do in this country without getting London's approval. Right. So, in fact, during the patriation talks, it finally got the whole reason that got solved was Trudeau threatened to go to London without the provinces. I mean, that was the real reason this finally got solved, right? So when it was at the point where the Prime Minister of Canada had to threaten to go to another government to solve a problem, how independent can you be?
Right, exactly, yeah. So here we got at Michael, as long as you don't have to support the Lions over the All Blacks. Oh, he's a Kiwi citizen under the King of New Zealand, just became a Canadian citizen, had to take the oath to the King of Canada, which is the same Joker. Yeah, that is the same. My dad is
same person, different office.
Yeah, he's British and chafed at having to swear allegiance to the Queen, as to become a Canadian citizen. Yeah,
that's all right. Knox had worse things happen to him, where being from New Zealand, he had to take an English test before he could become a Canadian citizen too, so.
Well, I'm sure it was easy, right? So at least it wasn't a French test.
Yep.
Yeah. Great. Okay, so that's the Queen of Canada, Queen of England. Let's see if there were other good questions that we had from Twitter here, actually. And it's an interesting phraseology. I think you enjoy it when you can just say that certain words are completely wrongly chosen. So let's take a look at this one. What's that?
Told you I had an illness.
Yeah, there you go. So I don't think I have a ticker for it, but so I'll just take the ticker away. But somebody asked, is there a constitutional way to remove Canada from the British Commonwealth?
Yeah, so first things first. Hasn't been the British Commonwealth since the London Declaration in 1949. Now it's just the Commonwealth of Nations.
Right.
But it's that's another area where people tend to figure that anybody in the Commonwealth is somehow subservient to the UK, which is just untrue.
Right.
So the Commonwealth, it's 54 countries. 5 of those countries have monarchs of their own that are not King Charles.
Right.
34 of them are republics with their own presidents. So the head of the Commonwealth is a purely symbolic title that just is the essence of what the Commonwealth is supposed to generate, or supposed to be, right? As an association of folks that just have very similar political views. That said, within the Commonwealth, there are now 15 countries that are referred to as Commonwealth realms, and those are the countries that all share the monarch as head of state. But to leave it, it's just it's by. There's no constitutional link there at all.
Right.
It's basically a big club where everybody gets together and plays games from time to time.
Right. So. Yeah, and it can be, I guess, in some cases symbolic. Deciding to leave is a way of snubbing Britain. I guess they have a particular attachment to it.
That's definitely happened. With Barbados having just removed the monarchy, they were very clear they were staying in the Commonwealth.
Right.
But the other side of that coin is also a way to make a statement by expelling people from the Commonwealth. Zimbabwe was expelled several times.
Right.
Due to their human rights record. So.
Hmm. Hmm. Was South Africa? I can't remember how that went down, but they
Yep.
were removed, weren't
Yeah,
they?
they were expelled for a while. They're back in
Yeah,
now. But yeah, there
after
was
apartheid.
apartheid.
Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah, yeah. Okay. So Canada is not part of the, or Canada is part of, Canada is not part of the British Commonwealth, but is part of the Commonwealth of Nations. So there's
Yep.
our correction.
Also, that francophone.
And in terms of constitutionally, it's just not part of our constitution.
Like I say,
So
it's no different than any other world organ. I mean, could leave the Olympic Committee if we wanted to, too, right? So
right, of course, yeah. Well, but I think ultimately what they're getting at with this question, and I think that this is really the best. I didn't know this before we started talking. Once you saw my British "Do We Need the Monarchy" video, which somebody recommended it to you on Quora, and they said, "Look, this guy gets it bang on," and you went and watched it and just sent me all these angry messages, which was really nice. Um, but so removing the Queen as head of state, so
you're
it's
removing the
something
king as head
that's
of state.
sorry. You see, look at that. Removing the monarch. Let's just be
There you
gender
go.
neutral.
Yep.
Removing the monarch as head of state. Um, can we do it? Should we do it? I know you don't think we should do it
Yep.
for many
Like,
reasons, but what would it take?
yeah. So for clarity around that, I don't think we should do it. I mean, I've certainly got my sentimental and emotional reasons for it, but the biggest reason I don't think we should do it is completely pragmatic in that it's one of the few areas of the Constitution that needs to be done under Section 43, which is also known as the unanimity clause. Excuse me.
Right.
What that basically means is all of Parliament has to agree, and then all of the provinces have to agree, every single
Right.
one of them. Now
Is it?
imagine you're
It's every single one of them. I thought it
every
was
single
like
one of
there's
them.
that like 2 out of 3 prairie
That
provinces or something.
Yeah, that's Section 38, which is the 750 formula. So that one
Right.
you only need Parliament, and then you only need seven of the provinces. But of those seven, it has to equal 50% of the population.
Right. Right.
So underneath that amending formula, if you can't get Quebec or Ontario, it just ain't happening.
Right.
But the unit the Section 43, like I say, it requires all of Parliament in every single province. Now imagine you're the premier of Alberta,
Right.
and the federal government starts making noises about going to a republic model. Well,
Hmm.
you've got a once in a generation shot at removing as much power as you can from Ottawa in order to agree to do
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
that.
You're gonna take that. Yeah.
Imagine you're the premier of Quebec, and you've now got you've got Ottawa at the bargaining table for constitutional amendments. What are you going to take from the feds?
Hmm.
Like this has the people think about that just that it doesn't mean much to anybody, and there some of us it means a great deal too. Some of us hate it. I've often said being a monarchist in Canada is one of the few times apathy works for you, but that has the very realistic possibility of tearing this country apart.
Hmm.
Because again, the provinces are going to go after absolutely everything they can. They're going to blame the feds for anything they can't get, and all you're doing is stoking the flames of separatism at that point. I
Right.
mean, all of that nonsense to get rid of the monarchy? No, thank you.
Right. Rob says Detroit Lions. I wish I knew. I think about what that was. Unfortunately, I'm not a big sports fan, but they have a better chance to win the Super Bowl than for any government to unanimously agree. I think that means it's a low chance, right?
It's virtually impossible. It's
Yeah,
politically
yeah,
impossible.
yeah, yeah. No, I think yeah.
Now,
I think you were saying too that Manitoba in particular throws this
yes,
into a little bit of
yep. So there's
particular difficulty there,
another
right?
wrinkle there is anytime there's a constitutional amendment in Manitoba requires a referendum. Now, for clarity,
Right.
they cannot be binding. In a
Referenda.
West, referenda, yes, cannot be binding in a Westminster parliamentary democracy based
Right.
on the premise of parliamentary supremacy. But that out of the way, ignore a referendum with high results at a government's peril, right?
Hmm.
So yeah, so if there's any sort of a constitutional amendment using any of the formulas,
Hmm.
Manitoba requires a referendum of its
So
people
they'd have to have one referendum to see whether or not they should
support it.
participate,
Yep.
and then a second one for the entire country. So,
Yeah, like for clarity, the referendum underneath the Section 43 is not constitutionally spelled out, but
right,
it's pretty well understood as a result of the conventions from Beach Lake and Charlottetown.
right.
That the people have to have a voice, and they do that through referendum. Now, referendums are a horrible way to make any decision, in my view.
Right.
Unless
As Brexit kind of showed us, right?
yeah, Brexit,
Yeah.
the Quebec referendum.
Hmm.
You take a look at the Scottish referendum, and it had a very simple, straightforward question: should Scotland become an independent country? Yes or no? At least that had that going for it. You look at the question Quebec asked in '95. Actually, I look up
Well,
the
and that
exact
was
thing.
a big part of the
But
controversy, right?
yeah,
Was the question,
yeah.
right?
So the issue becomes it's way too easy to game a referendum based on the question, and there
Right.
is just I'm struggling to think of a question you could put to a referendum to the people that could be easily answered. Most folks just aren't that deeply involved to truly understand the ramifications, and I think Brexit is a prime example of that. There was
Right.
a lot of emotional rhetoric going on at the time. That whole 35 million pounds a year to the NSA a week, sorry, to the National Health Service, which Farage got on TV the day after the referendum and said, "Yeah, by the way, that was bullshit." Um,
Yeah, well, I think people had debunked it while it was going
of
on,
course they
but
did, but this whole emotional thing was going so
hmm
high. They started talking about things like there were uh, 64 different regulations on pillows.
right,
And
yeah, yeah, yeah.
when you dug
Which
into
just
it,
it confirms all of these sort of British stereotypes of those continentals, right?
yeah, yeah, but when you dug into it, it turns out there were 65 of them.
Yeah,
But all 65 were pointing to basically 8 different other regulations in the EU that were very easy to understand, right? So,
right,
I mean,
yeah,
bureaucracy is bureaucracy. We'll give it that, but
yeah,
it's just too easy to screw with people, and
yeah,
referendums are
yeah.
just a terrible way to
And
do it.
we elect people to represent us. That's Burkean, you know.
Interestingly, though, is we don't Westminster parliamentary systems. We don't elect people to represent us.
What do you mean?
We elect people to make decisions on our behalf. That's
Okay.
not a subtle difference.
What's the what is the distinction here? This is what I don't know. For people who have not seen Danny before, this is what our conversations are always like. I say something, and he's like, "Well, that is a very important legal distinction that you've just made. So
Yep.
please, what is the difference between representing us and
Yep.
making
So
decisions for us?"
So when you look at countries, some of the Nordic countries, the way they run their democracies, there's a lot of direct democracy involved,
Right.
and so their decisions will get made by collective decision from those that they're representing. In Westminster parliamentary systems, instead decisions are made by those we elect. So our
Right.
expectation of our MP is you're going to go to Ottawa, you're going to listen to everything that's being said, you're going to make these decisions based on your best understanding of what's best for us. Now,
Okay.
obviously, we can have a long discussion about whether or not MPs really do that,
Indeed.
but the fundamental matter is that MPs don't represent us; they make decisions on our behalf. If you don't like enough of those decisions, well, every 4 or 5 years, you have a chance to fire them.
Right. Right. I still don't think I fully follow the distinction. So
Well, like I say, the direct democracy models in some of the Nordic countries are the best example I can give you.
right.
The representatives come back and they actually have a vote on what the representative is going to do, and then the
Right. Right.
representative goes back to their parliament equivalent and then
Right.
makes that then
And
casts that
so
vote.
like Edmund Burke, right? The way he sees representation
Yep.
in the government is that you go and you like you elect a wise man. In his
Mhm.
case, it would have always been a man, of course, in order to make decisions for your benefit. You
Mhm.
choose somebody who you think has particular wisdom, and whether, of course, this is the case in Canada or not, I probably more so not. But the idea there, though, is that you are that they make decisions for you, and that's what representation is, I guess.
Right, but
I don't know.
again, they're not representing you, right? They're representing your riding. Excuse me.
Right,
They're not
fine.
representing Tristan. They're or Danny. They're representing that riding, and that's where
Right.
people tend to get caught up on that. Right? Is like, no, no, you're there to represent me. Well, no, I'm here to represent.
Yes, sure,
Uh,
sure, sure. And
so,
if that's where you're going, like they represent us. I guess I would say like and us, I mean people in my riding. Yasser
mhm,
Nakvi, my MP,
mhm.
represents my riding, and all the
Yes,
people in it.
yeah, but again, it goes back to the difference between direct democracy and but that's where you tend to find true representative democracy because again, the local folks actually vote on what
Yeah.
that member will do.
Right. I
Um,
see. I see. So you're saying, yeah, yeah. I don't know. I get. I like the distinction because I think it clarifies
mhm.
what we do in our democracy in Canada. But I would say philosophically, it's probably still representation. But maybe that's an
but
argument that's not worth.
You're trying to tell me that I got bogged down in semantics? I don't believe you.
There you go. All right. So, wait, where did that come from? What were we asking about for that question? I can't remember, but it was a good conversation, anyways. so, well, why don't we go more fundamental? So, this is how I thought we might actually introduce here. But you said some really interesting things to me in our discussion the other day around the Constitution, insofar as, you know, what is it? What's it for? Like, how should we best understand the role of the Constitution in Canada, in our democracy, in our society? Like, what's,
Yeah.
you had some really pithy answers here. So,
Boy, I wish I could remember them now.
yeah,
Um, at the end of the day, I mean, what is the Constitution, right? It's a set of rules for what the government can and, more importantly, can't do.
right,
It's there to ensure that the it's there to ensure that the country moves forward in a way that it was designed to move forward.
right,
We're a little more advantageous in Canada on most stuff. Is that we've got a living constitution, as opposed to
hmm
the U.S., where they like to throw that term around. But let's face it, it's absolutely not a living constitution. There's just too many originalists down there. In
yeah, yeah, I
Canada,
know,
we don't have that
yeah,
problem because we've got a reasonably active court system that actually updates its decisions, every
hmm
20, 30, 40 years. Um, but that I think is the big thing about constitutions for me, is that it specifically spells out what the government can't do,
right,
by enumerating what your rights are. And this is an area where I've gotten in many arguments with originalists in the U.S.
hmm
Because they keep relying on this idea of God-given rights or natural rights.
Now,
Um,
to explain for the audience, an originalist is someone who believes that we should interpret laws as they were originally intended by their.
no, they believe they should interpret laws as they're written by the originators. So this guy that had uh, the Federalist Papers, which were all written by candlelight on seagull feathers,
Right.
somehow should be the only way to interpret a document written from that time. It just blows my mind. Um,
Sorry, could you clarify what you mean there?
what
I don't get it. Like, from what I understand, they believe that, the Constitution, if it says, you know, uh, you have the right to bear arms, right? Like the Second Amendment there. That is just that, like, across the
that
board, doesn't mean it matter
totally.
how guns change, doesn't matter
Yep,
anything. It's
exactly
just
right.
that you always get to have them, and
Yep,
there's no sense in interpreting the sense of it and adapting it to modern conditions. It's just
exactly.
that's
Yeah,
how they wrote it, and we must keep it there or change it
and
wholesale.
that's what blows my mind. The folks writing the Second Amendment. I mean, maybe possibly one of them could have maybe read a pamphlet somewhere on a design of a Gatling gun that was coming out in a few years, possibly. But more than that, it was all smoothbore muskets. That's what they knew
Right,
as a firearm.
right,
The idea that there would ever be a weapon that could spew out 1,500 rounds a minute was it just never would have occurred to them.
yeah,
And yet somehow that written all that time ago still should apply today. And it gets
right,
interesting because you throw and again, like I am not against guns at all,
yeah,
but you throw the question back, you'd be like, okay, so you're telling me you should be allowed to own any weapon? Well, yes, I should. I was like, okay, great. So if I give you the material, are you going to go build a nuclear weapon? No. We're being a little reducto when I
cheeky
say
here.
that
Yeah,
word.
yeah,
But the answer to that should be yes, if that is truly
yeah,
what you believe, right?
yeah,
And it almost never is. I'm like, oh, okay, so there is a limit.
yeah.
And a lot of religionists I've dealt with, that's when they start talking in circles, or
Right.
just shut
And
down.
on that particular issue, yeah,
Yeah,
that seems to be the
yeah.
case. So, but anyways, going back to the Constitution then, so, and its purpose, you argue with the originalists that uh, the Constitution is what? Were you
Oh well,
saying? I
that's
can't
the nice thing
remember.
about Canada is we've got a living constitution. The, the
Right.
the courts are able to reinterpret things as we go. So that's gay marriage is probably the best most recent example I can give you of that. When in during the late '70s and early '80s, as they were fleshing out the charter, I'm quite certain that nobody thought about gay marriage
hmm
when they were writing down what your rights were. And
hmm
then come along, 25 years later, 30 years later. The
Right.
courts took another look at that charter and said, well, of course that has to include gay rights and or gay marriage,
Right.
and absolutely right.
Right.
So 10 years before the U.S. ever got around to it at a state by state level,
Mm-hmm.
all of Canada had legalized this because the courts were able to interpret the Constitution in such a way to grant more rights, for lack of a better term, to a group of people that didn't have them before.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Okay. Cool. I see here. I see some comments here in the chat. I think going back to our Second Amendment stuff, that probably gets people pretty excited. But the original intent is the only way to interpret. I guess talking about.
Well, sure, but
Uh,
but how do you get that intent, right? It's by the words, and
yeah.
it's just not the words in the Constitution either, right? There's also the Federalist Papers,
Right.
and the problem is all of those words were written with an understanding of the time.
Mm-hmm.
So I think the founding fathers in the U.S. I think they were well ahead of their time.
Mm-hmm.
I think they for a long time I said that the American Republic model could only ever work in America.
Right.
I kind of started to question that over the last few years, but um, they were
Well,
ahead of
it's
their time.
they tend not to export it, right? When they bring democracy to the world, it's usually a French model that they put in in other
Yeah, yeah,
countries,
and
right?
interestingly enough, when certain types of folks tend to they take over their own countries, they often look to put an American type model in. So who knows, right?
Yeah.
But yeah, again, like they were ahead of their time for sure. They were a lot of very
Mm-hmm.
intelligent men, but they were men of their era.
Mm-hmm.
Most of them would be just fine with owning slaves today.
Right.
So
But I guess, and I'm not saying that I necessarily agree with this. I sympathize with the idea that, well, if you don't like the law the way it is written, then you should change it, right? Like why like it leads to, and I obviously am very much in support of Roe v. Wade, but the criticism against it was that it sort of makes the judiciary an activist,
yeah.
that they feel that they have to interpret things in a way to make progress, whereas the laws should just have been changed, right? But
Yeah. So that is definitely a risk. Again, I'm certainly not going to try to suggest any system's perfect. But my counter to that would be that with gay marriage becoming legal in Canada, no law was changed. There
right,
was no law changed. It was just simply to take a look at the charter and said, yes, of course, gay people are included in this right.
right,
So that would be my instinct on that one is if it because the thing at the end of the day, the courts can't change law. You know what I mean?
right.
They can throw laws out, they can declare laws unconstitutional, or they can
Mm-hmm.
toss it back to the government and say, okay, we're going to keep this law in the books, but you've got 180 days to come up with something new. But
Mm-hmm.
at the end of the day, the courts cannot change the law. Only the
Right.
government can do that. That said, like I say, using the gay marriage example, there was no laws changed. It was simply a reinterpretation of who the charter rights applied to.
Right. Right.
And if you're going to tell me that the charter rights shouldn't apply, don't mean you, of course, but if somebody's going to tell me that the charter rights shouldn't apply to a group of people because of their sexual orientation, I'm just not interested in your opinion.
Right.
So,
Right. Right. And it does seem that that sort of interpretation sometimes is used for things I don't agree with. you know.
yep, yep. But that's where an
but
activist judiciary can also come in handy. I mean, we've
right.
got a group of professionals that make decisions based on, by and large, on the law. I'm not trying to say there's never been a judge run amok in Canada or anything, but that's the other side of that coin. Sometimes
Right.
an activist jury, judicial, is not a bad thing.
Right. 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 Okay. Cool. I'm enjoying this conversation. These are all fun things. So, but why don't we talk then about the Constitution? Actually, what did we decide? So the other day, what you said to me that I really liked was that your Constitution is there to tell you what you can't do, right?
Yeah,
That's the fundamental purpose of a Constitution.
to tell the
What do
government what it
you?
can't do. Yeah.
Yeah. Sorry. Yeah. So tell the government what it can't do. So what do you mean by that? Like, what are some maybe an example of way it circumscribes, I guess, the power of government? Is
Yeah,
that what you mean?
so we were talking the other day there. I think habeas corpus is probably the best example that most people would identify with.
Right. And so habeas
Um,
corpus being
you
the
must have the body, I believe it is. Yeah.
yeah,
So,
yeah, yeah,
yeah,
yeah.
you've got
Well, may you have the body. Yeah, yeah,
yeah,
yeah.
you've got a right to be put in front of a judge within a reasonable amount of time when you're arrested.
Right.
It's specific. It's explicitly telling the government that you can't go out and arrest somebody and throw away the key.
Yeah.
You
Right.
must put them in front of a judge. So that's probably the best example that I think most people would easily get behind. is
Right.
that the Constitution is specifically there telling the government you cannot imprison your people
Hmm.
without due process.
Right.
So, and at the end of the day, that example goes to just about everything else we can discuss, right? It's all about what the government can't do as opposed to
Right.
necessarily what the government can do.
Right.
Um, there is perhaps an argument to be made that there's some gray area in Canada, given the preamble to the Constitution Act 1867, where we've got an uncodified constitution next to a codified. But
Right. So can you talk about that? What do you mean? So like, what is it? What is uncodified in this written
right,
preamble?
so a lot of people they make a crack about how the UK doesn't have a constitution.
Right.
And the truth is, it does. It's just that it's uncodified.
Right.
The other people will say that the UK has an unwritten constitution, which isn't true.
Hmm.
It's just that it's codified. So in the UK, their constitution is based on what happened before. It's based on precedent. It's based on bills that were passed before.
British.
It's
Yeah.
based on,
Yeah.
yeah. So when Canada became a
Common
country,
law.
or a dominion rather, yeah, common law.
Yeah.
When Canada became a dominion, it accepted all of the constitutional principles that were active in the UK as of 1867 to be part of the Canadian Constitution. And then it went on to actually have a written constitution.
Right.
So a lot of the functioning of government falls into that category.
Hmm.
So for example, if you went digging through every Constitution Act there is in Canada for the duties of the Prime Minister or what the Prime
Hmm.
Minister's responsibilities are, you won't find it.
Right.
There's one passing
Yeah.
mention of the Prime Minister in the Constitution Act 1982, and all it does is refer to First Ministers meetings once a year.
Right.
Nowhere is that office defined. Nowhere is its powers defined. Nowhere is there any understanding of what a prime minister is and how one even becomes a prime minister. We
Hmm.
have that office because the UK had that office.
Right. Right.
And in the UK, and even in the UK, the prime minister is not an actual office. In the UK, the prime minister is legally first lord of the treasury and minister for the civil service. The
Okay.
prime minister of the United Kingdom is not a constitutional office.
Right.
Where Canada doesn't have anything similar to First Lord of the Treasury or anything like that. We just accepted the fact that we will have a prime minister because we will have a constitution similar in principle to that of the United Kingdom,
Right.
as the
Right.
phrasing
Right.
goes.
Right. Is that's how it's said?
Yep.
Right. Interesting. And so what why do you like you are very much in favor of this system, I think you've said before.
Yep.
Why do you think that it's good to have parts that are unwritten, uncodified, sorry,
Yeah.
like this?
Well, first of all, I mean, Canada inherited the benefit of damn near 1,000 years worth of evolution in government.
Yeah. Yeah.
Starting from William the Conqueror, moving through to Magna Carta,
Hmm. Hmm.
and so forth, right? Um, so that gives
Alfred the
us,
Great, you could argue.
yeah, you 100% could.
Yeah.
So that gives us a well-established common law. We
Right.
understand what our I don't want to say our natural rights because that phrase drives me a little nuts with American commoners, but we have a very clear understanding of what our rights are and what the government can't infringe upon, whether it's written down or not, thanks to
Hmm.
that 1,000 year plus of history coming up to us there.
Right.
So, and like I said, some things don't necessarily need to be written down. I mean, the property rights are probably the best example I can give you.
Hmm.
They were specifically left out of the Charter of Rights and Freedoms. Um,
Right.
it was kind of interesting
Yeah.
actually because today's Tories they actually support an amendment to the Charter.
I was gonna say, yeah, that's something that I've been hearing about too. Harper, I think, was
Yep,
even trying to make that happen, right?
yep. They actually support an amendment to the Charter. Of course, that requires a constitutional amendment
Yeah, indeed. Yeah.
to enshrine property rights. And what's interesting is at the time, Pierre Trudeau wanted the property rights in. It was the premiers that fought him on it.
Right.
So,
Right.
it's just sort of weird to see this echo through history where you had one of the most liberal prime ministers of the 20th century
Right.
suddenly in agreement with one of the most conservative prime ministers of the 21st. So,
Yeah. Yeah.
for history, for that matter.
History. Well, conservative. It's an interesting question, right? Check out my
Fair,
video
fair.
for more
Yeah,
details. But certainly the most neoliberal
yeah,
prime
yeah,
minister that we've ever had.
yeah.
Um, Rob says, good Monty Python quote here: "Watery tarts distributing swords is no basis for a system of government." You know,
Yeah, well, I don't feel like I need to scream, help, help, I'm being oppressed. So,
repressed, right?
repressed.
You don't feel that way in
Not, not,
Canada?
not, not currently,
No?
no.
No, that's because you have you're a liberal government, which, well, anyways, I think you were saying too to me at one point that it is more left than you would be comfortable with. But anyways, that's maybe a topic for a different
Sure.
day. Um, so why don't we get into the Emergencies Act? Do you want to go there? Is that a
Sure.
bit
I,
dangerous?
I might
We
have
got an
a
hour. We got about 55 minutes left.
I might have a thought or
Of
two around this.
Yeah. So I don't know if people know, but last February we had some fun times in Ottawa with the so-called Freedom Convoy challenging the. Oh, this is for some of the American people I know that are, or at least one of them who's watching. Um, challenging the mandates for masks, for vaccines. I mean, obviously the origin is in the truckers who were told that they needed to have the vaccine to cross the border, um, and so they headed to Ottawa and essentially set up a little shanty town with some gas canisters laying around, fires everywhere, hot tubs, and um,
Bouncy castles.
bouncy castles, and the result was after a lot of dithering by the Ottawa police and the province and the federal government that Trudeau enacted the what used to be called the War Measures Act. I don't know. Would you accept that thing to say? Obviously, it's the Emergencies Act now, but that was the legislation that it was replaced. I think it's useful to put that in there. I don't know if you do or not, Danny, but which in turn triggered the Emergencies Act. Oh, one of my lights has gone off. The Emergencies Act inquiry that we're now. I guess it's over now. Is it over
Yep.
now? Has it
Yep.
finished?
Yeah, I think it
So
closed up today.
yeah. We've learned a lot about how our government works and the sort of decisions that were taken around the Emergencies Act. What do you think, Danny? Do you think it was a good idea to quote unquote suspend basic civil rights?
Okay, so first
Um,
things first, civil rights were never suspended.
oh,
The,
sorry,
Emer-
sorry,
the,
sorry.
the Emergencies Act specifically calls out the fact that it cannot suspend civil rights.
Right, right, right. Apologies,
Um,
apologies.
but a couple things to parse out first. One is I don't doubt for a second that there were some truckers up there with an earnest beef with the government.
Right.
I don't agree with them. I think they were pointing that out at, I think they were pointing a lot of their frustration in the wrong place because 95% of the mandates that they were demanding go away were constitutionally not within the power of the federal government to do. But that aside, and I just want to get that out there because again, I do believe there were some folks there with legitimate beef.
Hmm.
I don't agree with them, but it's all good and fine to disagree.
You're allowed
Um,
to complain
yeah,
to
yeah,
your government and
yep,
protest to your
yep.
government. Yep.
The issue becomes is that they quickly got subsumed by some far more radical types. Let's say the Tamara Lynches and the Pat Kings of the world.
Yeah. Tamara
Um,
Leach, I think. Yeah.
Tamara Leach. Yeah, sorry, you're right. And the that's where everything fell apart. So they were allowed to sit there. And now people talk about how Trudeau was being a fascist by enacting this, and I'm like, let me make sure I understand this. The same guy that absolutely refused to bring out the military, the same guy that watched all these protesters coming in from the north, east, south, and west for weeks, the same prime minister that did nothing while you walked into the nation's capital and occupied its downtown for weeks on end,
Hmm.
is somehow a fascist. They just walk
Yeah.
me through that thought process. So all that said, when it became clear that the Ottawa police simply couldn't handle the situation, they we found out through the inquiry there that they originally thought they were going to be able to deal with some of this stuff because they felt the OPP could get tow trucks in.
Right.
And when they went to the OPP to get this done, the OPP suddenly went, "Well, no, I can't do this. I don't have the power to order the tow trucks in because at that point the tow truck companies had said we're not going in there." Um, so the Ottawa police's plan entirely basically fell apart right there.
Right.
Um, and so throughout all of this, I mean, where's Doug Ford, right? Because what we have to keep in mind is that policing is a provincial power; it's a provincial
Hmm.
responsibility. Doug Ford absolutely dropped the ball here. He completely abdicated any responsibility for this. And again, pragmatically, I think we all know why. It was an election year.
Hmm.
Far better for a Tory premier to have the Liberal prime minister piss off the right than him.
Yeah.
So that just basically went nowhere. Now, in fairness, there was some movement at the border, of course, but uh, so when all this gets said and done, and then you've
Yeah,
got the
I mean, there
people.
was a significant amount of movement at the ambassador bridge in
Yeah.
Coutts there in Alberta.
Yeah, and oddly enough, the bridge is where, $1.3 billion a day goes through. Somehow
Yeah,
Ford managed to deal with that.
yeah,
But the people of Ottawa can go pound salt apparently. Um, so you had for 3 weeks there the people of Ottawa just getting their lives turned upside down. And I mean that's the thing about rights. Yes, you've got a right to protest,
hmm
but as my mother used to say, my right to throw a punch ends at your nose.
hmm
Your right to exercise your rights does not give you an automatic right to infringe on everybody else.
hmm
Um, so at some point, something had to get done. And
And how long did it last? Was it 6 weeks or 4 weeks?
It was only about three
I
weeks.
should know.
Yeah, it
Was it
was only
three
about,
weeks?
yeah, 3 weeks.
Oh, it felt
Um,
like forever. I live in Ottawa, and so
yeah, yeah.
you know,
Funny. The other thing nobody seems to consider in this is actually people's pets through the occupation. All
right?
that noise that was going on. Apparently, there were an awful lot of dogs that need to be in therapy now.
Oh yeah,
So
yeah,
yeah,
yeah.
which is quick side note is particularly funny. I brought that up to a few supporters about how dogs were, peeing all over their owners' floors and everything because of the horns and everything else. And all of a sudden, it went from, well, screw people that can't sleep to, well, maybe there could be an arrangement where people will know when the horns are coming so they can comfort their dogs. So let me get this straight. You don't care about the human beings, but let's get the dogs in comfort. That you are a special kind of person.
Right,
Anyway,
right.
so all that said, something had to get done, and Trudeau clearly finally had enough. Pulled the trigger on the Emergencies Act, and then this apparent fascist uh, then gave everybody days of notice that look, we are going to end this. This is coming
Right.
Saturday. You've got 2 days to get out. You've got one day to get out. You've got da 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 da. The methods in which the Emergencies Act legally has to be executed were followed to the letter. There's a little bit of an argument there, in as much as the Speaker of the House delayed the vote by a day.
hmm
It needs to be approved once the Governor and Council enacts the Emergencies Act. It has to be voted on by Parliament within 7 days.
hmm
It actually took 8 days, but that was a result of the Speaker of the House delaying the vote by a day with the approval of all party leaders because of some security concerns by the occupiers, I should say.
Right.
So by the time it actually got to the Senate for debate, it was over.
hmm
Uh, Ottawa had managed to give the police the powers they need to get the whole thing done and over with. We all saw it on TV. It was very calm. It was very measured.
hmm
Again, people were given days worth of notice to get out.
Right.
So now we're after the fact, where everybody's talking about how civil rights were suspended, which again the legislation
Right. You're
clearly
right.
comes
Yeah,
out.
that was my mistake there.
Yeah,
Yeah, for
but you're
sure.
not the only one at all. I mean, that is the go-to
Well, and that
mantra.
is,
Right.
I think because people often have the War Measures Act in mind when this is brought up, which that is that not you know what, and I actually don't know.
No, no,
Is
the
that what the
War
War
Measures
Measures
Act.
Act?
Yeah, that was definitely the precursor to the Emergencies Act. In fact, the
But is
reason.
that what it did? Did it suspend civil liberties? I
Yes,
know
the
that at
Emergencies Act
the
flat out suspended
right,
habeas
like
corpus, for example.
habeas corpus, right?
Yep,
Yeah, yeah, because they
yep,
arrested all those people during the
yep,
October crisis,
yep,
and
yep, yeah.
you
It
weren't
was
allowed
a
to even
sledgehammer.
be a member of the FLQ, and
Yep,
yeah.
yeah. No,
But
it was
the
an absolute
Emergencies Act
sledgehammer.
is a lot more defanged,
Correct, and by
in that
design.
sense. Right.
Yep. So again, now we've got everybody bitching and moaning about how their civil rights were suspended, and they clearly weren't. First of all, but
Right.
secondly, very few people I've spoken to, the people love to talk about their rights, and you can't violate this right, you can't violate that right.
Right.
Um, but what I immediately do when folks bring that to me is I'll be like, okay, first of all, tell me what section of the charter that right is included in. Now that might be a little pompous because I mean, it's not maybe not necessarily you don't necessarily have to know what section of the charter your freedom of expression
Right.
is in. But the next question I come up with is what does Section 1 say? I mean,
Right.
you must have read the charter to know what your rights are, right? So what
Right.
does Section 1 say? And the very first thing the charter says is that none of your rights are absolute.
Right.
It clearly spells that out. Now, the go-to example is you can't yell fire in a crowded theater.
Right.
Because again, your right to yell fire, your right to express yourself cannot endanger others.
hmm
The resulting panic that might result in that could kill people.
Right.
So when you want to
Sure.
talk about your rights being violated, you then have to look at whether or not Section 1 applied. And we know that Section 1 applied to a lot of the COVID laws, for an example. Things like the Atlantic bubble, that was almost immediately challenged, and the Supreme Court in Newfoundland pointed to Section 1. as with a lot of the other rights. So Brian Pickford, who interestingly enough, is should be one of my heroes because he was the guy that got the monarchy into Section 41 of the Constitution. Um, he launched his own charter challenge against the Emergencies Act. He
Right.
was an architect of the charter. Um, the Canadian Civil Liberties Association, which I mentioned to you before, is the only one of these groups I think is worth a damn
Mm-hmm.
at all. They're bringing up a charter challenge. I believe strongly that all these people know they're going to lose. The courts have historically always been on the government side to deal with an emergency.
Right.
Um, the CCCLA, I think, is asking some important questions, and I'm glad that they're doing this challenge because I do think
Right.
some sort of a decision from the Supreme Court would be very useful. But I'm extraordinarily confident that the courts are going to come back and say that what Trudeau did was not unconstitutional.
Right. Right.
The inquiry may have a different view on not the constitutionality, of course, but whether or not everything was done correctly. I'm confident that they're going to come back and say everything was handled correctly. Um,
Yeah. Yeah.
and what people need to remember there is that whatever the inquiry finds, it's not a criminal inquiry.
No. No.
Uh,
Of course. Yeah.
any
Yeah. Yeah.
ramifications are going to be political in nature.
Mm-hmm.
So
Mm-hmm.
that's
I do you
that's my
think
deal.
that do you think that there? Oh, I should also just shout out. There's people just entered dementia slideshows. Welcome to the live stream, and one of my students, Kellen, is in the chat there. So hi, Kellen. but
Well, hey,
so
Kellen.
yeah, there you go. Um, so do you don't think that there? I mean, I don't think that there will be any consequences at all for them.
Well,
In
I
my
think the
mind,
Tories are going to make a lot of political hay out of this in 2025.
you think so? You
But
think they can really?
absolutely.
It's Teflon Trudeau, right?
Well, I don't believe Trudeau will be leading the Liberals into 2025. So,
Well, he says he's gonna,
well, I mean, what else can he say, right? If he
Yeah,
were to say no,
true,
I'm not
true.
going to do it, he's
Yeah, we're gonna be like, well, who's gonna replace you? Yeah,
well, it's more than that. But I mean, how does he get anything done? Like he'll have lost any power that he has within the
right.
party, any
Yeah,
power as
that's a good
prime
point.
minister, because who wants to?
Right,
It's like the president of the United States in their last term for their last year. I mean, they drop from the news cycle because they become pointless, right?
right, right. Yeah, yeah, for sure.
But
That's a good point.
yeah, no, I'm sure the Tories will make hay out of this. The part, it's one of the parts where I keep shaking my heads at the Tories is they're so quick uh, to jump over stuff like this, and yet upwards of 60% of Canadians supported the use of the Emergencies Act against the convoy.
Right.
So
Yeah, yeah.
yeah,
But
the
that's what I mean. Like, I don't know that this will really. Uh, most people are not in support of the convoy. It seems, and that those their politics, generally speaking. Um, I mean, that said, I mean they shook things up, right? They changed the leader of the Conservative Party, arguably. Um,
three
well,
times in
but
the last four
well,
years.
no, I mean the convoy resulted to some extent in Aaron O'Toole's stepping down, right? And
No, I don't know if I'd agree with that. Aaron O'Toole's
no,
the noose was around his neck the second he lost that
it
election.
was it was yeah, it was,
Um,
but
yeah,
it was sort of the
and
straw that broke the camel's back
well,
in
Poirier
some
had
sense.
already been leader for a while before the protest started, the occupation rather started. So
He had been sort of effective leader, you mean? Or
no, he'd actually been he'd been elected leader before the
no, he
election
hadn't.
started.
No, he just got elected pretty recently. Um, when was Poiliev?
I was going to say I need to look that one up to be honest with you, because
Yeah,
that was very
Poiliev. Yeah, he. Well, I mean, Aaron O'Toole stepped down during the convoy, right? Like that was,
the way I
And
recall it.
Pierre Poiliev. I mean, his star has been rising for a long time, but um, when did he become?
So you got me second guessing myself here, Tristan. And that's not something I do often on this topic. So
There you go. Look at me. Look at me. I got one.
uh,
um, yeah, so 9th of September he became the leader.
Poirier did.
So Poiliev, yeah, yeah,
Yeah, okay, I
the
stand corrected.
Conservatives. Yeah.
Good for you. Good job. I stand corrected. Way to go.
Thanks, man. Thanks. I was paying attention to one
Yep.
thing, but yeah, I mean, so you wouldn't agree. I mean, like you're right that O'Toole lost the election and that was a big deal, but he did, he wanted to stay on, right? He
Of
was
course he did.
fighting to do so. Um,
Stornoway is a nice place.
yeah, yeah, yeah. Well, certainly better than
24 Sussex, yeah.
24 Sussex these days. Yeah. Um, but they did do that. I've heard a lot of people sort of make the case that if the convoy hadn't happened, we might have had mandates in Ontario and in many places longer.
Yeah, I've heard similar nonsense, and I'm like, well, the convoy worked because we started dropping the mandates right after it, and somehow the fact that vaccination rates had skyrocketed, that COVID infection rates had gone down, that
Yeah,
it's these facts don't seem to matter. It was all because the convoy did its job.
yeah,
You know, and like I say, 95% of what the people were complaining about at the convoy, just the federal government couldn't do a thing about it.
right.
So, why are you here? You're
Hmm.
trying to make a statement nationwide. Great. Doug Ford down in Queens Park doesn't give a. It's not affecting him in the least.
Hmm.
So again, and then you look at Canada
Yeah,
Unity and their MOU to commit insurrection.
right.
That
And that's
really,
particularly in your wheelhouse. That was
yeah.
they made. Can we go into that in some detail? So what's an MOU for one?
A memorandum of understanding. Now, I just want to preface this by saying, in Canada Unity's defense, they did retract this shortly after
Hmm.
a few days after they put it out. But they put out this MOU simply, basically stating that they were asking the Senate and the Governor General to dissolve the House of Commons
Hmm.
and appoint Unity candidate itself as an effective executive in order and then order then have the Governor General order the end of all mandates and
Right.
passports and everything else. It was out and out insurrection. There's no other word for it.
Hmm.
So that tends to get glanced over. People are like, well, it was only a few people. And I'm like, yeah, well, it might have only been a few people that showed up on January 6th. And everything snowballed from there. I mean, I don't know that I know the answer to that. The point is, you had a group of people at this occupation actively advocating for insurrection, for the literal topple of an elected government.
Hmm.
The fact that the federal government then turned around and used the Emergencies Act to end this is not that shocking to my view.
Right. Yeah, I mean, I tend to agree with you.
Yeah.
Yeah, yeah. And but in terms of the content of this MOU, so it was like they were asking something that was not constitutionally possible, right? So
Well, that was the other side of the point. Was utterly ridiculous. The idea that the governor general can somehow fire the prime minister, that's just not a thing.
right, right.
The governor general
So the governor
certainly,
general always acts on the advice of the prime
yes,
minister, right?
yeah,
It's the
like
other
from
way
a
that things go.
yeah, like all things being equal, the governor general is basically the rubber stamp that it's accused of being by some folks.
Hmm.
The same with the monarch, right? The difference is that with the governor general there, you do have, and the monarch for that matter, you do have an authority above the head of government. You do have somebody there that is legally and constitutionally capable of saying no. Now, that's the strength of the Westminster parliamentary democracy system, is that that just doesn't happen. Nobody puts
Hmm.
the king in a position where he has to say no. Um,
Hmm.
but should a prime, then the example I always give is, all ignoring every other issue in Parliament where this would never happen. But if a prime minister somehow managed to get a bill through Parliament that ended the right to vote for everybody except landowning males, that bill cannot become law until the governor general signs it. So now you've got what's a constitutional guardian in place to say, I'm not signing this. This cannot
Hmm.
become law. That's the real advantage there is you've got a stopgap. The undeniable right of the governor general or the monarch for that matter is the right to advise, encourage, and warn. So
Right.
the governor general can advise, maybe you want to look at this a different way. Um, uh, you can encourage them to try something else, and then finally warn them and say, look, I'm not signing this if you bring this to my desk. But
Hmm.
again, this is I actually have trouble thinking. In fact, what's happening in Ottawa or Alberta rather might be the most realistic example where something like this could happen. But
Right.
past that,
Where they where they could refuse to.
yeah, refuse to grant royal assent.
Right.
Um,
You mean
uh,
like the lieutenant governor could
yeah,
do that kind of?
yep,
Yeah,
yep,
yeah.
yep, yep, yeah, the
Right.
lieutenant governor
That's
or
a very interesting idea. Yeah, yeah. But
disallowance
the
from the governor general.
that hasn't happened, right? This law was passed and signed into law, wasn't it? The Sovereignty Alberta Sovereignty Act.
No, it's just being introduced now.
Oh, is it? Okay, right. Sorry, not the Sovereignty Act. It's the Alberta Sovereignty Act, or the Alberta Sovereignty within a United Canada Act.
Yes, yeah, the full name there, yeah.
Yeah. Okay. Right.
So,
But
but
so
yeah,
yeah,
that's
fundamentally, that's how these things work. I am curious though. What would happen? Like well, you grow up hearing about how this works and that, you know, the governor general could technically say no, but never does. But say, they want to pass a law. Like imagine Justin Trudeau is actually the fascist that all of the convoy people think he is, and signs in a law that he is now. He wants to sign into a law that he is now dictator for life. We're
mhm.
going the way of 1939,
Yep.
not 19, whatever it was in Germany. Like, what happens if the governor general says no? Like,
Okay. So,
what happens if the monarch says no in Canada?
yep.
Right.
So, like at the end of the day, that bill cannot become law until it's given royal assent by signature, either by the governor general in most cases, or the monarch, right? Um, so, what basically would happen in that case is you got to play a little armchair here,
Mm-hmm.
because I mean I can see how this would go from a constitutional standpoint. Is that if the governor general were to refuse to sign a bill, the prime minister's real only alternative is then to resign the government in protest.
Right.
Like we saw during the Bing King affair in 1926. Once the prime minister does that, the governor general now has to make a decision: do we have an election, or is there someone else in the House of Commons that can command the confidence of the House? Um, that's sort of the constitutional way things should go, right?
Right.
Odds are a writ would be dropped for an election and let the people decide what to do about this mess. Excuse me. There is, when you take a look at what happened in Spain in
Oh, with the Catalonia and everything, where they marched the
no,
army
no,
in.
no, the what year was that? Basically, right after there was a military coup in Spain,
Oh,
and
like during before the First World War, you mean, or the
no,
Second
no, no,
World
this
War?
was
You
in the
mean?
'70s, I
Yeah.
believe. There was a military coup, or an attempted military coup, rather, and King Carlos, he actually got on TV, and it was basically the same thing, right? Like King
Right.
Carlos actually got on TV in his military uniform because the military, the people that were trying to take over had convinced the military that they were acting correctly and that the king supported them. When
Mm-hmm.
that actually got back to King Carlos, he actually got on TV in his military uniform and said, the military does not have my support. I support the elected government. I'm
Mm-hmm.
asking the military to put down your arms, stand down. And the military did,
Right.
because the rank and file
Right.
just, they just got an order from their commander in chief and followed it.
Yeah. Right. Yeah.
So using that as sort of a guideline, you can see a scenario in which the prime minister says, "Screw you." The 1981 Spanish coup attempt. Thanks, Mike.
Yeah. There you
Or
go.
Michael, sorry. The You can see a scenario where a prime minister would simply say, "I don't care if you sign it or not. This is now the law of the land." At which point the governor general can say, "No, I'm dismissing your government," and
Right.
prime minister saying, "No, you're not." Well, what's left to mediate this is the military.
Right. Right.
I know when I was in the reserves, if I'd gotten in such a situation, if I'd gotten an order from the monarch versus the prime minister, which one I would have followed.
Yeah. What?
Um,
For
the,
curiosity's
the
sake.
monarch in a heartbeat. I mean, like when you join the forces, that's where you're swearing your allegiance to, right?
Yeah.
And in this particular example, I definitely would have said, screw you, prime minister. I'm not having any part of this.
Right.
And I've actually had this conversation with a lot of other folks I've known in the military, and they've all said, and not just Canada, but also the UK, Australia, and they've all said the same thing: is they would happily take the order from at that time the Queen than they would any prime minister in such a situation.
Right.
So that's
So my
the only other
my
realistic option.
Michael counters you, by the way. But that is Spain, not the Commonwealth. Spanish have a mixed history with the English, so
Which
this
is
this doesn't
irrelevant, Mr.
apply.
Knox, because I was using it as an example to go down what could happen here. So you have to use
Well,
precedent to decide alternative history.
if you do believe it, we are in for Trudeau doing that, soon enough. So
Yeah,
you
but
know,
I heard the same thing about his father. So
yeah, right. And that is an interesting thing about them. They certainly seem to drive passions. The Trudeaus.
yeah, well,
um,
it's because in their own way. I mean, Pierre Trudeau, like he was an intimidating guy.
yeah,
But I don't think we've had a more towering intellect in Parliament since probably MacDonald.
Well, and he just had, pardon my French, but he had balls too, like in
Well,
a way
that's
that
the
was,
other side of that
you
coin,
know,
right? Just watch me and all that, right?
well, and even I was watching that the classic Fuddle Duddle thing the other day, but he
Yep.
wasn't even the prime minister then, right? He was just an
I
MP that was
think it's Minister of
mouthing
Justice
"f
at the time.
you." Sorry.
I think it was Minister of Justice at the time.
Well, regardless, okay,
Yeah.
so okay, fine, he's cabinet, but he's mouthing "f you" to other MPs in the House of
In his sandals,
Commons.
no less.
Like, wow, you
No,
know,
I think
yeah.
I said the fuddle duddle or something like that. Yeah.
Well, no, he makes the whole case. He's like, well, what can be in a man's mind? Like he totally goes like philosophical on them. Like it
Yep.
was, I could have said fuddle duddle. Like, anyways,
Yep.
regardless. So the Trudeau's pissing people off. His father seems more. There's a seriousness to it, but I don't know.
Yeah. Yeah. Whereas Trudeau Jr., as I call him, he's just got a different way of pissing people off by his just his demeanor of he's got his father's nasty streak in him. I don't think there's any doubt about that. I
You
could
think so?
actually,
What do you mean?
well,
I know
I
what you
don't want
mean,
to.
but
I don't want to tell too many secrets at a school here. It's just that I've had a personal experience where asking Justin if he's going to be an Elliott or a Trudeau is a bad idea.
right.
So
I
he's
can see
definitely,
why that would be. Yep.
yeah,
Yep.
he's definitely got a mean streak in him. Don't get me wrong, I didn't ask him that just for clarity. That wasn't
Right.
me.
Right.
But I've got very firsthand knowledge on what happens if you do that. Um,
And just for context, for people who are not familiar, like Pierre Elliott Trudeau is his name, and Elliott refers to the fact that it was his mother, right, who was an Anglophone,
yes.
and that's where the Elliott, and then Trudeau is his French side, and so there's also, I guess, I don't know the philosophical differences between those two sides of the family, but I think that was often, in Quebec, he was thought to be more an Elliott in some ways, if you depending on your position on sovereignty in the province, but
Yeah, well, that exact phrase was pointed at him. Was
yeah,
Mr. Trudeau, are you going to be an Elliott or are you going to be a Trudeau?
yeah,
So I definitely, I'm very confident saying Justin's got a very mean, a strong mean streak in him when he needs to bring it out.
right,
But just his general good looks and socks. Oh God,
yeah,
the
yeah,
socks.
yeah,
People just love to latch on that and just hate on. But it goes back to what I said earlier. If the man were to walk on water, people would say he couldn't swim.
hmm
So a
hmm
lot of the times I just ignore most of this because it actually puts me in a spot numerous times where I have to defend the guy and I don't really want to,
hmm hmm
just because they use this sort of nonsense.
Well, and I sort of pushed back on you the other day about this, just saying that, for Trudeau, his image is a big part of what he sold the country, right? So,
Can't argue
like,
that.
I guess, like, I do think it's fair ground in some sense. I just seem like to criticize the image stuff, but it does seem to me that it kind of like ends there. They're like, ugh, the socks or whatever, or you're like, oh my God, I love his socks, right? Like,
Yep.
it does seem like the image, he's got this sort of magic quality that it tends to stop people from thinking as soon as they process these aspects of the image. Oh, his
Yeah.
hairdo. Like, what you either like him because he didn't cut his hair during COVID, or you hate him because it just doesn't seem to. There's not a lot of depth to it, but
Yep. Yeah. The first prime minister to have a beard since Borden, I think it was.
yeah, yeah,
And people had
like,
opinions about that, and I'm like, "Are you
yeah,
kidding me, guys?"
yeah. Well, and it became this. Oh, is he an elder statesman now? Does this mark like are we? Is there now the bearded Trudeau versus non-bearded thing? Like it was, yeah. But
Yep.
again, I think that it's worth criticizing it. But I agree with you. I don't think it ever goes any deeper. It's
Yeah.
just
Yeah.
it's superficial. It's like, oh, I don't like that thing that he
Yeah.
is
Well,
doing, rather than what is he
exactly.
trying to do with that, right?
That's where I shake my head. Is I don't know how many times I've had to listen to nonsense about Trudeau, and it ended with
Yeah,
the socks. It wasn't that there was anything of value or substance being added
right.
about the man. It was just oh, he's a pretty boy with dumb socks. Well, if that's all you
Yeah.
have to add to the conversation,
Or if you're pro Trudeau, he's gorgeous, and I love that he wears cool socks and takes selfies in the woods.
I don't think I've ever said any one of those two things, but yes, I do
If you
take them
love,
in.
if you, I think there are, there's Trudeau fanboys out there, Trudeau
Yeah,
fangirls,
they
right?
exist.
Like,
Yep.
yeah, they exist. I guess they're a lot quieter these days than the
Yeah.
the ones
Well, like I
that don't
say,
like him.
it's I'm looking forward to his long walk in the snow. I can definitely say that with conviction.
Again, good Trudeau senior reference.
Yep.
So, yeah. All right. Maybe we'll. I don't know. Trudeau keeps on coming up. It's an easy topic, right?
It
Like
is. It
everybody,
really is.
it gets everybody excited when we talk about the Constitution. The comments in the chat die down a little bit, but. Um, Anyway, so
Sorry,
maybe
sorry, just
there's.
for a quick note here, I do owe Knox an apology. So I
Oh
never call him
yes,
Mike, and for some reason the Mike fell out of my mouth. That's Knox. I apologize.
apologies. Yes, let it be a point of order.
Point of order, call him.
He shall be known as Michael Knox, never Mike.
Of course,
Um,
if we're going down that road, I better start yelling about strangers in the house. But okay.
okay, so let's see what else can we talk about here. So separation of powers, we kind of got into a little bit in our little
Mhm.
pre-chat the other day. Um, so this is the concept as I understand it, and I think you can obviously correct me here, but the idea that the province and the federal government are separate but equal legal entities, not equal,
Definitely definitely not equal.
definitely
Um,
not equal.
yeah, no,
Okay,
because the Constitution spells out anything that isn't specifically delineated as a provincial power falls to the federal government.
right. Yes.
Um,
What's that called? It's there's a term for that.
it's generally referred to as a supremacy clause.
Okay. Right. Right. Okay. So if it is not in the Constitution, it belongs to the federal government.
Yeah, well,
Interesting. So they're not equal.
if it's not specifically enumerated to the provinces, it
Right.
belongs to the federal government.
Right. Right. Okay. Okay. But otherwise, there is this idea that things like healthcare,
Mhm.
um, what else is a provincial competency?
Education.
Yeah. There you go. There you go. Education. Exactly. Roads. That kind of thing.
Do you know anybody in
Um,
the education field?
No, don't know anybody. I try not to know those people. Yeah, I know exactly. The province literally pays me, so
Yeah.
as just in case people don't know, on the live chat, I'm a high school teacher in Ontario, but then the federal government has other competencies that they are responsible for, like international affairs, that kind of thing. So we talked about this the other day, but it seems to me that the federal government is having an impact more on provincial competencies these days. You didn't necessarily fully agree with me there, but the idea that like when they give money to the province
Mhm.
for healthcare to plug financial gaps and everything, they're exercising a kind of centralizing force on these people,
Mhm.
on these governments, I should say. What do you think about that? Do you think that's fine or? Um,
I definitely think it's fine. And the reason for that, again, I don't mean to overuse the word, but it's pragmatic. Healthcare in particular,
that is your philosophy, your political
it really is. Yeah.
philosophy. I feel like in some ways, yeah.
Yeah. Healthcare in particular is an instance where, when it was designed, universal healthcare was designed in Canada. There had to be an overarching set of standards.
Right,
Nobody wanted a situation where you would have a different level of care if you had a heart attack in British Columbia than if you had one in Prince Edward Island.
right.
You needed to have the same set of standards from coast to coast. So that's where the Federal Ministry of Health and Health Canada and all the rest of that comes into. So what the feds did was they said, okay, we're going to come up with the standards of care that you have to maintain. If you
Hmm.
do, we will give you X amount of dollars to cover these costs. If you don't want to do this and you've got the option not to do this, that's fine. You can go create your own universal healthcare system, but you're going to pay for it.
Right.
So one could definitely make the argument that the feds have a way to manipulate the provinces through these transfer payments.
Hmm. Yeah.
But there's a little bit of going back to sometimes life isn't fair. But
Hmm.
the real argument there is that there has to be a set of standards,
Right.
and the provinces have to be enticed, for lack of a better term, to follow those standards. And what's the best way to entice any government? Allow them to offer a service that they only have to pay a portion for.
Right. Right. So, not a problem for you in constitutionally. Ultimately, you think that that's it's. I mean, I just wanted just to push back on you a little bit. Not that I necessarily disagree, but uh, you like the outcome, and so it's okay.
Yes, but I think most Canadians probably like the outcome. I mean, we can all certainly have some opinions about healthcare and how it's being run and how effective it is, and da 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 da.
Right.
Da. But at the end of the day, whatever your opinion on healthcare in Canada is, no matter
Hmm.
what province you live in, you're not living underneath the same fear as so many Americans, where
Hmm. Hmm.
your your family member gets cancer. Shit, I got to sell the house.
Hmm. Hmm.
And how do we get there? Well, we get there by a set of standards, and we get there by money being dumped into the whole scenario through taxation
Right.
collected at the federal level. So
Don't you worry? And again, I still agree with you ultimately, but don't you worry that this makes the federal government more important than it ought to be? That people ought to care more about their provincial governments, and if voting for Justin Trudeau means that you get health care reform or whatever, or voting for Pierre Poilievre means you get that funding cut, overly prioritizes federal politics, in some sense. That's already the case, I would argue, but
yep,
but
I wouldn't disagree that it's already the case. It runs, it goes back to excuse me, it goes back to sometimes life just ain't fair. Sometimes things aren't working out quite the way you want them.
yeah,
But overall, how is the system functioning? When I look at Egypt or Rwanda or even the United States, and I look at our system, I'm like, okay, we got a lot of room to improve here. But I don't. For all the reasons I fear getting sick, losing my house isn't one of them.
right,
And how does that happen? It's a result of the system we've got
yeah,
in place.
right. Yeah. I mean, I'd agree with you too. But okay, cool. Um, well, I'm not sure what else I've got. Do you have any things that you would like to discuss yourself? Any particular matters?
Oh no, you know me.
We've
I
kind
could
of
sit here
we've
all night and do this if you wanted, but we're getting pretty close to the cutoff here. So
Yeah, I think we are mostly. I've kind of gotten through all of the questions that I had there. I don't know if the audience or people in the chat there have any questions. Maybe we can wait for a second there, see if they do. I mean, there is the big guns about JJ McCullough, but again, that's too big to to bring
yeah,
out at the ninth hour here.
yeah.
Um,
What I will say about it is, same thing I told you before is I have a great deal of respect for JJ's knowledge. I have zero respect for his application of that knowledge.
right. Yeah, you're not a fan of how he's very smart though. He does.
Yep.
Yeah, I'm always shocked by the amount of information that man seems to be able to hold in his head, but
Yep.
I just
Yep. No, he's
disagree with him so fundamentally on
yep.
so many
Yep.
things. So,
Yeah, no, it's sort of
um,
the not that I would ever say this about JJ directly, but let me just say I've there are a few people I've met in my life who are the dumbest smart people I know.
so yeah, Michael Knox asks, who is JJ? JJ McCullough is another YouTuber. Who yeah, look him up. See what you think. He's really good. I personally I love JJ's videos. They're always philosophical investigations of Canada, except for when they're about socks. But he's still it's nice that there are other YouTubers out there doing that kind of content. So he kind of inspired me to start this channel actually in some
Well,
ways. But
like I say, I've personally crossed swords with JJ, and again, without going down that road, that's the best I can say about him. Is I have a
yeah,
great deal of respect for his knowledge. I have zero respect for his application of it.
right. Well, one day I'm going to do a video on JJ, and I'm going to get you to come in and say that. So
Sure.
we have a question from Fran Wicks, which full disclosure, it's my mom. She's asking, is it ever possible to vote directly for a leader similar to the United States?
So two things there, and I think Rob actually pointed this out. The U.S. does not directly elect its president. That's done through the Electoral College.
Right, that's true. That's
So
true.
the
Yeah,
problem
the
is
Electoral College.
the short answer is no, largely because it's fundamentally incompatible with Westminster systems. If we were to move to a republic, that would definitely be a conversation to have.
Hmm.
But the entire point. Let me put it this way. So let's say, just for the sake of argument, let's say that we elect a prime minister. Because again, in Canada, we don't elect prime ministers. But let's just say that we elect a prime minister. And the next morning we wake up and we discover that we've elected Justin Trudeau as prime minister, but the Liberal Party that he belongs to only got 50 seats out of 338. So now we've got a prime minister that has no way to negotiate the House of Commons because the rest of the seats, or the vast majority of the seats, belong to a different party than he does. So how can he possibly be expected to govern when his
Hmm.
party can't control the House?
Hmm. Okay, cool. That's a great answer.
So again, you guys completely incompatible with a Westminster system.
Yeah. Yeah, yeah, it seems so. Do they in France? Do they vote for their president? I believe they do, right? Like it's they don't have a electoral college thing or any
Yeah, no,
nonsense,
it's
right?
a direct popular election in France,
Yeah,
as opposed to say Northern Ireland, where their
yeah,
president, because I'm not even going to try to pronounce
right.
their the title for their president because but their president is actually elected through the legislature, so the
Right,
legislature actually elects the president.
right, right. Yeah. And but they also have like 5 rounds or something that they go through for the elections with the
Yes,
president as well. And I think it
multiple
lasts for
rounds.
5 years that they're in power, something like that,
Yep.
which
Yep.
does seem like a little too long somehow.
Well,
But
yeah, it's funny because people talk about an elected Senate here in Canada, and they talk about a directly elected prime minister, or excuse me, a directly elected president, and still have a prime minister. Because people often, when we talk about having a republic in Canada, they often point to the U.S. It's like I don't want that bullshit here. Well, the truth of the matter is the U.S. republic system is not the only republic system in existence. So France
right,
is the next example. And when you start to dig into some of the political troubles they have in France, when the president is of a different party than the prime minister,
right.
and then if that prime minister happens to be have a I forget the term they use for it in France, but if that prime minister doesn't have a strong grip on the House of Commons equivalent,
Right.
they wind up in the situation where the president and the government are just at constant loggerheads. And it's not like the U.S. where they belong to the same party very often, or there's some common
Hmm.
ground here or there. The powers that the president has in France can greatly overlap with the prime minister and vice versa.
Right. Right.
So it's, yeah, again, no system's perfect.
Right. For sure. We've got a bunch of comments here, some great ones. So a lot of people, MMP or die again. We've got Northern Ireland is single transferable vote from Michael. Rob saying that thank you for your sharing your knowledge in a world inundated with anti-intellectualism. You
Oh,
know,
clearly
that's
we have him fooled.
yeah, no, exactly. Um,
Thank you, Rob.
uh, and we have a great question too from Thesky. I hope I'm pronouncing that right, or Theshi maybe. Do you think Nunavut will ever become a province? And this is a great question too because it brings up the question of how does somebody become a province in
Yep.
Canada, right?
So honestly,
Um,
the short answer here is no. It won't ever become a province, and it's got nothing to do with the population or where it is or anything else. It's that the admission of new provinces into Canada is covered underneath Section 38 of the Constitution Act
right.
1982. So that
I'm
again, that goes
gonna
back.
check that
Yep.
just so we know. I
Sure.
should have had this early out,
No
but
problem.
so section
That goes
section
back to.
38
Oh, sorry.
says
I'm waiting for that. I'm waiting
specifically
for the Jeopardy theme song here.
the Governor General shall, from time to time, in the Queen's name, by instrument under the Great Seal of Canada, summon and call to get. Wait, no, that's not it.
Yeah. No.
No. Oh, Rob, that's the first time. Or Rob, Danny, that's the first time.
No. I'm saying
Uh,
you're looking at the wrong part of the Constitution. I think.
oh, am I?
Yeah.
Well, anyways, so it's not 40 that you're talking
Sec-
about, or
Section 38.
okay.
Section
Anyways, so
38.
you tell me. So what does Section 38 say? I clearly
Hang
looked up
on
the
a minute
wrong
here.
thing.
Let's be sure we're all clear that I was right the first time. Um,
We gotta look it up.
so that
Summoning the
goes
House of
back.
Commons is what I have for Section 38.
Yeah, resolution of the Senate of the House of Commons and the legislative assemblies of at least two-thirds of the provinces that have, in the aggregate, according to the last general census, at least 50% of the population of the provinces.
Right, right. So
So that's the 750
basically, it would be
formula
really
that we discussed
tough
earlier.
to do it. But why? What? We didn't we open the Constitution to create Nunavut?
No, no, none of it's a territory. So it only affected the federal government.
Right.
So it's purely within the power of the federal government to create territories. But past that, thanks to Section 44 of the Constitution Act 1982, the federal government can amend the Constitution for things that only affect the federal government.
Right.
So
Which
yeah,
territories being
yeah,
one of those things. Yeah.
yeah. So
So why don't you think it could become a province then?
because again, it requires the 750 formula. So if you take a look at as an example of why the 750 formula isn't used either,
So what is the
Stephen
750 formula?
Yep, sure. So that comes back to, in order to pass the amendment, you have to get seven of the 10 provinces to agree,
Right. Sorry.
and of those seven, it has to equal at
Has
least
to be
50% of the
50%.
population.
Right.
So again, without getting Quebec or Alberta or Quebec or Ontario on board, it's never going to happen. You
Right.
have to get one of those two provinces. So
But
if we
why
take a
couldn't
look,
that happen with
right,
creating Nunavut? Why couldn't that happen for creating a province?
because again, now you what can you're the premier of Quebec. and
Hmm.
the federal government has come to you and say, "Hey, I need you to agree to create a new province." Uh, what are you going to do as the premier of Quebec to agree? You're
Right.
going to suckle every bit of power you can out of Ottawa. No prime minister in
Right.
their right mind is going to open up that can of worms. The other provinces are, like I say, they're all going to have demands. It's a once in a generation opportunity to suck power out of Ottawa and look like the hero
Right.
back home.
Right.
So if we
So
get,
again, like Michael here says, so it's not no, it's just hard.
yeah,
But you think
Knox and I
it's
have long had these conversations. Um,
practically
they're,
pointless.
yeah, it comes when I say impossible, what I'm really meaning is that it's politically impossible.
Hmm.
Um, so we'll use Stephen Harper as the example. I mean, the man had a cornerstone of his platform of a Triple E Senate, like an absolute cornerstone. This is something we're going to do. Now, I knew from the get go that this was nonsense. That there was no way he was going to be able to do this because of Section 38. Excuse me. But what he wound up doing was he basically in his last year he finally referred the question to the Supreme Court, and the Supreme Court confirmed that Section 38 would apply. So here you've got probably one of the most strong-willed prime ministers we've had in probably since the last Trudeau, who had a cornerstone of his platform to do something that people actually give a toss about. Like there are plenty of people out there that want an elected Senate. I completely disagree with them, but that's besides the point. And he couldn't make this happen as a result of the constitutional hurdles. The
Right.
idea of that ever happening to create a province is again politically impossible.
Right. I mean, I think who knows what the future will hold, but with climate change and everything, and Nunavut becoming perhaps more important, you never know if that might cause some stress down the road for Canada in the year 22, maybe. Yeah,
Oh,
who
so we
knows?
have to start creating roads to go protect the Northern Passage. I suppose it could happen.
Yeah, there you go. It's on par with passing single payer healthcare in the U.S. Yeah, I mean that sounds like a political impossibility these days for sure. Um, let's see if there are any other comments here. I don't see anything else for now. I don't know if anybody has a last minute question, but that was a really good one, the Nunavut. But if nobody does, I think maybe we'll wrap it up,
Sounds
Danny,
good.
if that's all right. So thank you so much, Jenny, for coming on here and talking to me. I'm thinking we might be able to do this again sometime when I
Absolutely, this was a lot of fun.
have more things that I can say to shoot you down. So that's what I'm going to look for. My plan for the next one, no. But again, so you can reach Danny if you're interested in talking Constitution. He kind of likes doing it. I don't know if you guys noticed that. So that's on Twitter at Danny W Phillip. It's in the description, and you can also check
Danny
out his
W.
Quora.
Who?
Sorry, Danny W Philp,
Attaboy.
and that's critical, right? So he got angry at me. He was like, "Who's that person?" Philp, right? So Philp. Apologies there, Danny. Or you can check out his Quora, which is in the description. So with that, thanks a lot, everybody, for showing up, and we'll maybe try and do this sooner rather than later.
Thank you so much. This was a lot of fun.
Yeah, I had a lot of fun too. Later, man.
Bye.